This, of course, came as a huge shock, and William and I have been doing everything we can to process and manage this privately.
The morning sun over London usually brings a sense of timeless grandeur, but on this historic day, the air around the palace walls felt suffocatingly heavy. Hundreds of camera lenses flashed incessantly, casting blinding rays onto the cold stone steps where history was about to be rewritten in blood and betrayal. The press corps jostled for position, sweat dripping from their foreheads, driven by a primal hunger for a scandal that could shatter the very foundations of the British monarchy. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors swung open, and Princess Catherine stepped into the light. There was no glamorous gown today, no sparkling tiara catching the morning sun, and certainly no forced diplomatic smile. She walked with a terrifying stillness, the quiet confidence of a hunter who had finally cornered her prey after months of calculated patience. Her eyes were piercingly cold, fixed on the horizon, carrying a ruthlessness that sent shivers down the spines of everyone watching. Each of her footsteps echoed across the courtyard, striking the stone floor like heavy hammers nailing an enemy's coffin shut. She marched directly toward the podium, her hands slamming onto the wooden surface with a force that demanded absolute silence. There was no prepared speech, no polite protocol, and no roundabout greetings. Catherine held high a thick stack of bank statements, covered in glaring red numbers that told a story of absolute greed. Her fingers gripped the paper so tightly that her knuckles turned white against the morning air. The wind blew past, making the pages tremble slightly, but the arm of the future queen consort remained rock solid. In a steely, biting tone, separating every single word to ensure it left no room for doubt or defense, Catherine dropped a catastrophic bomb into the heart of the kingdom. She officially declared that the entire cash flow belonging to the palace's most prominent charity system was immediately frozen. The massive vault doors were permanently slammed shut, and not a single penny would be allowed to move. Below the podium, absolute chaos erupted as reporters screamed questions, thrusting their microphones forward like weapons, demanding to know the reason behind this authoritarian execution. Catherine completely ignored the uproar, lowered the papers, swept her cold eyes over the central camera lens one last time, and turned sharply on her heel to step back inside. It was not a mere announcement. It was a public execution. Catherine had just severed the financial jugular of her greatest rival right before the eyes of the global public. She didn't need a formal courtroom or a long-winded jury. Those bright red numbers were ironclad proof that $12.45 million, meant for the vulnerable, had been filthily snatched away by someone sitting at the very top of the royal hierarchy. Deep within the fortified stone walls of Clarence House, far removed from the screaming media outside, Queen Camilla sat paralyzed in a velvet armchair. The television screen broadcasted the terrifying image of a ruthless Catherine holding the financial death warrant. Camilla's hand trembled, tilting her premium porcelain teacup until the boiling hot liquid spilled over her expensive silk dress, soaking into her skin. Yet, she didn't even flinch. The physical burn was nothing compared to the absolute ice flowing through her veins. The secret treasure vault she had carefully dug through with dark stealth had just been locked from the outside. The massive fortune she intended to use to secure her ultimate power had vanished with a single sentence from a woman she had always disdainfully dismissed as a middle-class interloper. The permanent arrogance on Camilla's face shattered instantly, replaced by a deep, dark terror. Catherine's gaze on the screen seemed to pierce through the television lens, pinning straight into Camilla's soul with a silent promise that the massacre had only just begun. Every crime leaves a scent of blood, and Camilla's bottomless greed had left a trail too loud to ignore. Just 3 nights prior to this public destruction, thick darkness had enveloped Camilla's private reading room. Not a single lamp was lit. The only light source was the pale, sickly blue glow emanating from a laptop screen on her antique desk. Camilla sat there shrouded in a black velvet cloak, her hands moving frantically across the keyboard as her thirst for absolute dominance swallowed her remaining reason. Next to her hand lay a frayed red leather-bound notebook containing anonymous trust fund numbers under the name of her inner circle and minions specialized in manipulating the press. She had pulled a gold-rimmed, encrypted device from her pocket, jammed it into the slot, and watched the numbers dance wildly as $12.45 million poured out of the charity vault. It was supposed to be her ultimate weapon to silence opposing voices, buy off media networks, and maintain her underground manipulation against the Prince of Wales. When the screen confirmed the transfer, a twisted smile of satisfaction had crossed her lips. She had locked the notebook and the device inside a hidden wall safe behind an oil painting, fully believing her secret was buried forever, blind to the fact that her own arrogance had painted a massive bullseye on her chest. The very next morning, Camilla had proudly walked into a royal gala wearing a blindingly solid diamond necklace, the very first spoil converted from the stolen cash flow. She did not realize that the brilliant light reflecting from those diamonds was a beacon guiding her enemies straight to her throat. Catherine had stood in the corner of the room, her eyes locked onto the jewelry, knowing exactly that its value perfectly matched the massive deficit reported from the fund. At the same exact time, deep in the subterranean basements of the castle, a terrified financial manager was slipping a file of original bank statements into the hands of Edward, a cold and capable henchman who executed ruthless orders on behalf of Prince William. The electronic signature confirming the illegal transfer bore Camilla's name in clear, undeniable digital print. Armed with this devastating evidence, Prince William had marched down the red-carpeted corridors, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the file, his chest boiling with decades of suppressed wrath. He bypassed all advisors and slammed the door to King Charles's private office wide open. Without a single word of greeting, William slammed the file onto the polished mahogany desk, the loud crack tearing through the quiet room. The numbers circled in glaring red ink hit the aging monarch straight in the eyes. William growled a low, threatening command to read it, his knife-like gaze pinning his father to his chair. King Charles started slightly, his age-spotted hands trembling as he touched the edges of the papers. As his eyes scanned the lines and recognized his wife's signature, his pupils contracted in sheer horror. He understood the catastrophic reality. This was not just a simple theft, but an ultimate betrayal that could cause the entire monarchy to shatter under public outrage. Millions of citizens would tear the crown to pieces if they found out charity money for the poor was being used to fund a queen's private empire. Charles looked up at his son, searching desperately for a loophole or a compromise, but William's eyes held absolutely no leniency. The broken boy who had once silently endured Camilla's arrival was gone. Standing there was a ruthless commander ready to crush anyone who defiled the royal legacy. The air grew thick with a suffocating silence as Charles faced the ultimate choice between the woman he loved and the survival of the crown he had waited a lifetime to wear. Slowly, without a single word of excuse or defense for Camilla, King Charles picked up his walking stick, turned his back on the scattered evidence, walked straight into his personal bedroom, and pulled the door shut. The heavy metal lock clicked dryly, severing all ties. Out in the hallway, Camilla, who had rushed over after hearing of William's arrival, witnessed the entire rejection through a crack in the door. The sound of that locking mechanism was a physical knife stabbing into her chest. The husband who had sworn to protect her from every storm had just thrown her into the abyss to save himself. It was a betrayal more vicious than any attack from William. Panic seizing her entire being, Camilla dashed back to her room, frantically emptied her hidden safe, threw the red notebook and the device in her bag, and ordered her driver to flee London in the dead of night toward the remote Raymill estate, desperately believing she still held a leverage to bargain for her life. The long journey to the remote Raymill estate was wrapped in a suffocating, dense silence that felt like a dynamic prelude to an impending execution. Camilla sat frozen in the back seat of her luxury vehicle, her hands gripping her leather bag so fiercely that her fingers ached. She could still hear the distant echo of King Charles's bedroom door locking, a sound that officially marked her transition from an untouchable queen to an isolated fugitive. Outside, the pitch-black highway offered no comfort, only reflecting the dark emptiness that was rapidly swallowing her life's ambitions. She checked her phone repeatedly, but there was nothing but dead silence from her network of media manipulators and public relations minions. The grand illusion of royal protection had vanished into thin air, leaving her completely exposed to the cold precision of Prince William's hunting network. When the car finally crossed the iron gates of Mill, Camilla felt a brief, desperate surge of hope. She ran inside the house, locking the doors behind her, and headed straight to the drawing room sofa. She pulled the red notebook and the gold-rimmed, encrypted device from her bag, clutching them against her chest like a drowning person holding onto a piece of burning wood. She falsely believed that as long as she possessed this dark financial data, she still held a definitive leverage to force a compromise with the palace. But her survival instinct was blinding her to a brutal reality. Prince William had already authorized Edward to strip her of every remaining weapon. Edward did not use local law enforcement or public warrants, for the monarchy could not afford a public spectacle that would permanently tarnish the crown. Instead, he used the absolute, invisible power of the Royal Asset Recovery Unit. The suffocating stillness inside the Mill living room was suddenly shattered by the deafening roar of high-powered engines. 3 armored black SUVs tore through the gravel driveway, their tires screeching violently as they came to a sudden halt directly before the main entrance. The heavy doors opened simultaneously, and Edward stepped out, his tall silhouette completely blocking the dim evening light. His face was an unreadable mask of cold authority, and behind him stood 4 muscular operatives dressed in solid black, moving with the synchronized, lethal efficiency of shadows. They did not knock, nor did they wait for a servant to open the door. With a single, powerful kick, Edward shattered the heavy wooden entrance, sending fragments flying into the hallway. He walked directly into the living room, his muddy boots leaving dark imprints on the expensive Persian carpet. Camilla shrieked in terror, drawing her knees to her chest, retreating as far into the corner of the sofa as possible. Edward did not speak a single useless word. He simply pulled a thick legal document from his jacket and threw it onto the glass table. It was the ultimate contract of absolute silence and total renunciation. Right next to the papers, he dropped a pair of heavy steel handcuffs with a cold, metallic clank. The ultimatum was raw, naked, and merciless. She had to sign away her titles, surrender the red notebook along with the encryption device, or be dragged out in chains to face the ravenous pack of global reporters waiting outside the gates. Camilla looked at the steel cuffs, then out the window at the operatives blockading every single exit. They had cut the communication lines, and her cries for help would never be heard. Her royal arrogance was completely broken, crushed by the weight of a superior force. With a trembling, age-spotted hand, she reached for the pen, her heart pounding with a mixture of intense panic and humiliation. Each stroke of her signature across the legal papers was a self-inflicted wound, stripping away her honors, her freedom, and her identity. She had officially signed her own life sentence into a prison without bars. However, neither Camilla nor Edward realized that at that exact moment, a much more vicious blade was hurtling toward them from across the Atlantic Ocean. Edward snatched the leather bag, turning it upside down to retrieve the red notebook and the gold-rimmed encrypted device. He plugged the device into a compact terminal that connected directly to the central treasury network of Kensington Palace, programmed to immediately claw back the $12.45 million. Simultaneously, in a highly secure, windowless bunker beneath Kensington Palace, Princess Catherine stood with her arms crossed, watching a massive digital monitor. Behind her, a specialized team of royal forensic accountants worked in absolute silence. They were the silent guardians of the monarchy's wealth, preparing to execute a financial termination. The head accountant announced that Edward had successfully established the connection and the synchronization had begun. On the large screen, a green progress bar started to advance, each percentage point representing the systematic unraveling of Camilla's underground empire. Catherine watched the monitor with a cold fire in her eyes, feeling a profound sense of justice after enduring months of calculated slander funded by that very money. She gave a subtle nod, authorizing the team to permanently freeze the transactions and secure the funds. The accountant struck the keyboard, expecting the final confirmation tone, but instead, an ear-piercing alarm shrieked through the bunker. The green progress bar suddenly vanished, replaced by a bright, blood-red error notification that flashed incessantly against the darkness. In the Raymill estate, Edward's terminal vibrated violently as a cold, soulless notification hit his screen. He blinked in utter disbelief as the monitor displayed a total balance of absolute zero. The massive fortune of $12.45 million had completely evaporated without leaving a single digital footprint. The chief accountant at Kensington began typing frantically, his forehead covered in sweat as he desperately tried to trace the history of the transaction. Catherine stepped forward, her face pale with an intense, quiet rage, demanding to know where the money had gone. The lines of code, scrolling down the screen, finally revealed a terrifying truth. Exactly 30 seconds before Catherine's team had attempted to isolate the system, an automated life-or-death switch embedded deep within the encryption software had activated. Camilla had been nothing more than an unwitting pawn in a far grander and more dangerous chess game. The entire multi-million-dollar fortune had been re-encrypted, broken down into anonymous asset streams, bypassed every single security barrier of the Royal Bank, and was sucked directly across the ocean via an untraceable server route. The central monitor displayed the definitive, final destination of the stolen wealth, each letter striking like a heavy hammer against Catherine's ambitions. Sussex Trust, Montecito, California. A deadly, suffocating silence filled the underground bunker. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the exiles living on the other side of the world who constantly portrayed themselves as victims to the global media, had actually executed a flawless, devastating counterattack. They had secretly implanted a financial parasite into Camilla's dark network months ago, waiting patiently for her to commit the theft and for William to corner her. The moment the palace pulled the trigger, the Sussexes simply opened their palms and swallowed the entire loot whole. But the true terror did not lie in the loss of the $12.45 million. It lay in the fact that by mastering this specific cash flow, Harry and Meghan now possessed the absolute, undeniable evidence of the royal family's financial corruption and internal warfare. The American phantom had reached its dark hand straight into the heart of the monarchy, transforming that stolen fortune into a razor-sharp blade pressed directly against the throat of the crown that William and Catherine were fighting so desperately to protect. The shattering revelation that the $12.45 million had landed safely in the Sussex Trust account in Montecito, California, left the underground bunker at Kensington Palace in a state of absolute paralysis. Princess Catherine stood motionless, her hands gripping the edge of the iron table so tightly that her veins bulged, her mind racing through the catastrophic political implications of this failure. The Prince of Wales's airtight predatory network had successfully captured the domestic thief, but they had completely failed to secure the financial heart of the conspiracy. However, Prince William was not a commander who allowed his anger to remain unvented, and the fact that they had been outsmarted by the exiles across the Atlantic meant that the punishment for the traitor currently trapped at the Raymill estate would be absolute, swift, and completely devoid of mercy. Back in the dimly lit living room of the remote mansion, Edward stared down at the completely signed contract of total renunciation before turning his chilling, soulless gaze onto Camilla. He loomed forward, his massive physical stature throwing a dark, suffocating shadow over the Queen's shriveled and trembling figure. Camilla looked up, her cloudy eyes wide with a primal terror, because she could feel the intense, murderous intent radiating from the executioner, even though she still did not understand how her brilliant escape plan had transformed into a total trap. Edward did not offer a single word of explanation. He simply extended his large, solid arm and violently grabbed the blindingly solid diamond necklace resting on her neck. This jewelry, which was the very first spoil converted from the stolen charity cash flow and a loud symbol of her ultimate arrogance, did not deserve to remain on the flesh of a convicted sinner. Camilla shrieked shrilly, her arms flailing wildly as she desperately attempted to protect her last remaining royal prize, but her physical strength was nothing more than the weak, pathetic resistance of an insect against a giant. Edward yanked the necklace off with brutal force, the sharp sound of the gold clasp snapping echoing through the silent room like a gunshot. The violent pull scratched a long, bleeding streak across the Queen's wrinkled neck, but Edward didn't even blink. He stuffed the priceless diamonds into his pocket, completely indifferent to the tragic, deranged wails of the broken woman collapsing on the sofa. The domestic purge executed by William's faction was absolute and uncompromising. On Catherine's direct orders, a squad of black-clad bodyguards systematically destroyed every single piece of communication technology inside the estate. Camilla's smartphones, laptops, and encrypted tablets were thrown onto the hardwood floor and violently trampled under the heavy military boot heels of the security team until they were reduced to twisted piles of plastic and glass, ensuring that not a single signal line could connect her to the outside world. Her entire network of personal sycophants, private media agents, and loyal bodyguards were dragged out of the mansion by their collars, stripped of their official royal badges, and thrown headfirst out of the iron gates into the cold night. Replacing them were soulless, silent guards absolutely loyal to the Prince and Princess of Wales, transforming the luxurious Raymill estate into a heavily fortified, invisible prison. That very afternoon, Buckingham Palace coldly broadcasted a sharp, definitive bulletin to the global media, officially announcing that Queen Camilla was forced to permanently step back from all public duties due to a sudden and severe deterioration in her health. The brief statement requested total respect for her privacy during an indefinite period of convalescence, offering no press conference, no medical details, and absolutely no public appearance by King Charles. It was a calculated, digital execution that completely erased her existence from the active world. The heavy iron gates of the Raymill estate were pulled shut and secured with massive, intertwined iron chains and heavy padlocks. Camilla collapsed by the drawing room window, her trembling hands pressing against the cold glass as she stared out at the completely empty, silent lawn. She still officially held the title of Queen Consort and her heart was still beating. But in reality, she had been buried alive by the very system she had tried to manipulate. She was completely stripped of her power, forbidden from stepping a single foot outside the perimeter, and legally banned from speaking to another human being without the explicit, written approval of the Wales faction. Every single meal she ate, every step she took across the empty corridors, and every hour of her sleep was now under the suffocating, constant electronic surveillance of Catherine's operatives. Her bottomless greed had cost her everything, locking her away for the remaining days of her natural life in a golden cage without bars. Meanwhile, the shadow of Montecito grew longer and more menacing over the British crown. By capturing both the multi-million-dollar fortune and the digital evidence of the internal royal warfare, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle now held the ultimate lever of power. The $12.45 million was no longer just stolen money. It had transformed into a ticking political time bomb capable of destroying the monarchy's public reputation instantly if leaked to the global press. The Justice faction had successfully neutralized the enemy inside their walls, but in doing so, they had unwittingly handed the ultimate weapon to their most dangerous adversaries across the ocean. The Game of Thrones had not ended with Camilla's silent elimination. The true, bloody massacre was only just beginning, and the crown remained directly in the crosshairs of a phantom enemy they could neither track nor control. King Charles's ultimate decision to lock himself inside his private bedroom and completely abandon the wife he had spent a lifetime protecting would forever be remembered as the most ruthless yet necessary chess move of a survivor. He chose the preservation of the throne over the woman who had dragged the family's legacy into the mud of sin. Was this a masterstroke of monarchical survival? Or was it the ultimate act of cowardice by a king who had completely lost control of his own household? Share your profound thoughts with us in the comments section below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more exclusive deep dives. And make sure to click on the next video displaying on your screen right now to discover the next chapter of this unfolding royal war.
It did not transfer that dirty money into Camilla's son's account as she had hallucinated. Camilla herself was merely a blind pawn